Welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, the House passes a new anti-Semitism bill.
Meanwhile, the Fed leaves interest rates unchanged.
And we highlight the latest abortion fights in the U.S. But first, Republican governors are reaffirming support for Jewish Americans amid raging anti-Semitism on college campuses. Yesterday, the Republican Governors Association released a statement officially recognizing May as Jewish American Heritage Month, as the State of Israel officially declared its independence in May of 1949. The statement said, quote, "As governors and community leaders, we are honored to recognize May as Jewish American Heritage Month, especially as Jewish people around the world face unspeakable persecution." All 27 Republican governors signed the statement, saying, "We are proud to celebrate Jewish heritage and the many positive contributions that the Jewish community has had on our nation."
Meanwhile, as Republican governors make their stance, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill focusing on anti-Semitism, but not all Republicans are happy with the result. FISM's Ian Patrick has the details.
The House of Representatives has officially passed the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act on Tuesday in what was hailed as a bipartisan win by the majority votes. But it was also heavily criticized by especially Republican hardliners for what they say is a First Amendment infringement. The bill itself aims to address the rise of anti-Semitic behavior in the United States, mostly seen in protests across college campuses. It cites various protections for people who are victims of anti-Semitism under the Civil Rights Act, showing that it has been a year-by-year process. But as the bill states, multiple definitions of anti-Semitism have gummed up the system and could even fail in identifying newer manifestations of the crime. With that in mind, the act moves to create a singular definition of the term to clear up any confusion. This definition of anti-Semitism is provided by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which reads as follows, quote, "Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities." But the bill goes further in adopting the more contemporary examples of anti-Semitism also provided by the IHRA. And these include things like pushing the idea that Jewish people control the media or that they invented or exaggerated the Holocaust. And these are direct examples given by the IHRA, among a few others. And while the bill was praised for a widely bipartisan effort, not everyone in Congress was on board. In fact, 70 Democrats and 21 Republicans had voted against the bill when it was brought to the House floor. Both dissenters on each side of the aisle disagreed with the bill's wording. For example, Democrat Representative Jerry Nadler said from the House floor that the bill sweeps too broadly in how it prosecutes anti-Semitism. He argues that the bill criminalizes any kind of speech that is, quote, critical of Israel alone. Republican dissenters were a bit more forceful in their complaints and language. Representative Matt Gaetz, for instance, called the measure a ridiculous hate speech bill. He cited a contemporary example provided by the IHRA, which says that any claims of Jews killing Jesus would be considered anti-Semitic. Representative Gaetz then proceeded to quote various scripture verses which say that Jesus was crucified by a Jewish crowd. And he said he voted against the bill because of his concern that the Bible would actually be considered in violation of the guidelines. Representative Chip Roy voted against the bill for similar reasons, but also took time during the House speech to blast his Republican colleagues who supported the measure.
"We don't believe that a bill should be brought to the floor of the United States House of Representatives, having not gone through committee, that has a reference in it to international organizations' definitions, literally in the statute, and then taking that international organization's definition, and then literally in the statute, representing and referencing the examples of anti-Semitic behavior. In totality, they certainly raise First Amendment concerns. But when we want to insert the government into what you're thinking and what motivates you, you are empowering that which should never be empowered. The ability of the government to police thought, not the views that carry out then the actions. The actions are the problem.
Roy still assured his Jewish constituents that he was on the side of Israel, especially when it comes to the Gaza war, but not when it comes to prosecution under this bill. The Senate will take up the bill next, where it is expected to be introduced by Senator Tim Scott. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks so much for that report, Ian. Meanwhile, in other news, Republicans are up in arms over President Biden's plans to allow Palestinian refugees into the U.S. CBS News reports the Biden administration is weighing several options to resettle Palestinians from Gaza. The White House says this would mainly apply to those with American relatives.
In terms of the refugee admissions program, which is what I believe you're asking me about, we are constantly evaluating policy proposals to further support Palestinians who are family members of American citizens and may want to come to the United States. So we're evaluating it.
Florida Senator Rick Scott slammed the plan as a national security risk, saying, quote, "I have zero confidence in Biden's ability to vet refugees. How will he make sure they aren't Hamas?" Former President Donald Trump also expressed similar concerns.
Joe Biden seems he's just determined to create the conditions for an October 7th style attack right here in America. It's going to happen with all of these people coming in. Under no circumstances shall we bring thousands of refugees from Hamas-controlled terrorist epicenters like Gaza to America. We just can't do it.
Those who qualify for refugee status could eventually become American citizens, and that's something that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says is not in the country's best interest.
To take people from that part of the world and import those blood feuds to this country, that is not in your interest or your family's interest. We should not be importing people in from the Gaza Strip. I think part of what we need to do to unify the country going forward is to have people that actually want to assimilate into America, that actually believe in our founding principles, not people that just want to replicate a lot of these blood feuds that we see in other parts of the world.
And amidst all the unlawful college protests, courageous students have also been standing up against pro-Hamas sympathizers. Students at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill went viral when they protected the American flag from being destroyed by angry protesters. One of the Pi Kappa Phi fraternity members said, quote, "People began throwing water bottles at us, rocks and sticks, calling us profane names. We stood for an hour defending the flag so many fight to protect." Their courage drew the attention of many, including Senator Ted Cruz. He posted on X, "This is America, not the hatred and bigotry right now on college campuses." And the tide is beginning to turn at other campuses too. NYPD Deputy Commissioner Kaz Dodry posted a video showing officers pulling down the Palestinian flag at City College of New York and raising Old Glory once again on their campus flagpole.
A great sight to see indeed. Meanwhile, New York Mayor Eric Adams is blaming outside agitators for instigating unrest at Columbia University. Adams held a press conference yesterday after police arrested dozens of anti-Israel protesters who were occupying Hamilton Hall. He said it appears some of those protesters were not students, but rather trained professionals.
And I know that there are those who are attempting to say, well, the majority of people may have been students. You don't have to be the majority to influence and co-op an operation. That is what this is about. And so if we want to play the word police, you could do so. I want to play the New York City police, but we're going to protect our city from those who are attempting to do what is happening globally. There is a movement to radicalize young people, and I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it.
As you heard him begin to suggest there, he said young people around the world are, quote, being influenced by those who are professionals at radicalizing our children, saying he will not let that happen in New York.
And before we go on a break here, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is urging Israel for a ceasefire deal with Hamas while willing to blame the terrorist group if they cannot reach an agreement. In a separate conversation with Blinken, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated his intention to invade Rafah should Hamas not accept his hostage release deal. On the other hand, Hamas said that they will only accept a hostage deal if Israel commits to ending the war in Gaza. Netanyahu has rejected those terms, although he is open to discussing the restoration of sustainable calm in the region. Now, in the face of this continuous tension, Saudi Arabia is pushing for a modest Plan B, in their words, with the United States, which would indirectly involve Israel in a key defense agreement. And when we return with political coverage and national coverage after this break. And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's jump into the economy here. Interest rates will remain at their current two-decade high. The Federal Reserve decided against cutting its central rate yesterday, saying it needs greater confidence that inflation is slowing.
Inflation has eased substantially over the past year, while the labor market has remained strong. And that's very good news. But inflation is still too high. Further progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain.
This follows a Commerce Department report last week that showed consumer prices rose 2.7% year over year in March. He does say he expects to see inflation move back down throughout the remainder of the year. According to CME FedWatch, financial traders have dialed back expectations to only one rate cut at the end of this year.
Meanwhile, the DOJ is coming under increasing pressure to release the audio files of Special Counsel Robert Hur's interviews with President Biden over his handling of classified documents. Now, these would be those interviews that led to Hur ultimately describing Biden as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. The DOJ has so far refused to hand the files over to Congress, saying the president has a right to privacy. Now, critics are calling it a brazen cover-up, as Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton says, quote, "The public's right to know outweighs Joe Biden's privacy in this widely public case." The DOJ has also refused a Freedom of Information request from Judicial Watch, as well as requests from Heritage Foundation and CNN, in what could lead to a legal showdown later this summer. This also comes as the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees are considering contempt charges as well. The department doubled down on its refusal last week, saying they have had an inability to identify Congress's need for these files.
Meanwhile, new documents show heavy redactions in U.S. documents related to research conducted at the Wuhan lab before the pandemic. The report released by Empower Oversight said the documents show communications regarding the EcoHealth Alliance grant and any communications between Dr. Anthony Fauci and Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance in the middle of 2019, around when an enhanced growth notification should have been made to the federal government from EcoHealth Alliance. The nonprofit organization said the Wuhan Institute of Virology created dangerous chimeric MERS viruses during the 5th year of the EcoHealth Alliance grant, which was titled Understanding the Risk of Bad Coronavirus Emergence. Meanwhile, new emails from Facebook allegedly show the social media site caving to pressure from the Biden administration to censor claims that the coronavirus came from a lab leak in China and that the virus may have been man-made.
And in some more scandals here, the Senate Finance Committee yesterday blasted United Health CEO Andrew Whitty over a lack of cybersecurity that led to the largest hack on the U.S. health system to date. Hackers gained access with stolen login information back in February, and as a result, the hack paralyzed payment and claims processing throughout the U.S.
This hack could have been stopped with Cybersecurity 101. And I'm talking specifically about multi-factor authentication.
It's unacceptable that it took so long to help providers during a crisis of your creating.
The company was ultimately forced to pay $22 million in ransom money to unlock the system. Whitty previously said that data for 1/3 of all Americans might have been compromised in that attack, and he says it will take months to identify and notify everyone affected by it. United Health is now offering free identity theft protection and credit monitoring for the next 2 years.
Meanwhile, 26 states are suing the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives for a new rule claiming it unfairly targets lawful gun owners. States such as Texas, Kansas, and Florida filed lawsuits against ATF yesterday, saying the Biden administration's rules are unconstitutional and illegal. The new law requires every gun owner to register as an arms dealer to buy, sell, or trade firearms with friends and neighbors, according to Center Square. Critics argue that the law would essentially give free rein to the federal government to regulate these transactions, that is. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has argued that the rule is simply the implementation of the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was spearheaded by Republican Senator John Cornyn. Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach responded to the ruling by saying that Biden's ATF regulations will make many law-abiding gun owners felons if they sell a firearm or two to the family or friends, making the move blatantly unconstitutional.
And finally, federal law enforcement arrested an alleged ISIS member who's been in the U.S. for the past 2 years now. According to NBC News, he's a 33-year-old man from Uzbekistan who illegally crossed the southern border in early 2022. Border Patrol in Arizona arrested him at the time, but he was later released after he claimed asylum. Uzbekistan then sent a notice saying he was wanted for a possible connection to ISIS. It took authorities nearly a year after receiving that notice to make the arrest near the city of Baltimore. And this, of course, comes as Republicans continue to raise national security concerns over the Biden administration's border policies and also the administration's asylum policies as well. All right, and we have more news coming up next. But first, let's go back in time with Seth Udinsky for today's rendition of A Moment in History.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In our travel through history, let's wind the clock back a generation to the year 1986, to one of the most famous American tragedies ever captured on live television. On January 28, 1986, the spacecraft Challenger lifted off the ground at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time above the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. Just over a minute into the flight, one of the ship's internal fuel tanks imploded, causing the entire spaceship to break apart in what looked like, from the ground at least, a fiery explosion. All 8 crew members on board lost their lives, including Krista McAuliffe, a civilian high school teacher from New Hampshire who had joined the crew as part of a Teachers in Space program for her students. She was supposed to be the first ever American civilian to travel to space. McAuliffe's story had captured the attention of the nation, which drew many Americans to their television sets on the morning of January 28th. Sadly, this resulted in thousands of Americans, many of whom were children, watching a teacher go into orbit while in school, witness the tragedy. The other crew members who lost their lives were as follows: Gregory Jarvis, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Michael Smith, and crew commander Francis Scobie. On the night of January 28th, U.S. President Ronald Reagan postponed his regularly scheduled State of the Union address to speak to the nation in the aftermath of the tragedy. He gave a heartfelt address of remembrance and encouraged the nation to move forward in the midst of the horrible tragedy. The Challenger crew was honored with a Space Shuttle Challenger Memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, dedicated on March 21st, 1987. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
And welcome back to FISM News. Well, let's continue with this. Florida and New York are joining an antitrust lawsuit against the NCAA over its 2021 licensing rule. There are now 4 states plus the District of Columbia challenging a key part that bars prospective students from reviewing compensation deals. This forces athletes to commit to a team before they learn how much they will earn from the use of their name or image. Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody says that limits how students can negotiate the situation. Similarly, New York Attorney General Letitia James adds that student athletes should be able to call the shots on their career. The NCAA defends a recruitment rule by saying colleges support it and that it protects athletes from financial exploitation.
And moving into our abortion coverage for today, the Arizona Senate voted yesterday to repeal the state's near-total abortion ban after also passing in the House last week. The Arizona Supreme Court reinstated the Civil War-era ban last month, though the state said it would not enforce it for another 45 days. And the repeal will now cause the state's 15-week abortion ban to take effect, which was signed into law by Republican Governor Doug Ducey back in 2022, only a few months before Roe v. Wade was overturned. 2 Republican senators voted in favor of the repeal, arguing that keeping it in place would likely mean more voters would support a ballot measure this November that would enshrine abortion into the state constitution. That repeal now goes to Governor Katie Hobbs, who says she will sign it.
In Florida, however, the 6-week abortion ban went into effect yesterday. Vice President Kamala Harris responded to the law during her campaign in Jacksonville by saying that this is a direct result of 3 Trump-appointed U.S. Supreme Court justices who voted in favor of overturning the ruling. She said, quote, "Extremists have proposed and passed laws that criminalize doctors and punish women." She also claimed that pro-life laws will reject abortions even in cases of rape or incest, which is not true in Florida. The state has made exceptions for rape and incest up until 15 weeks of pregnancy, while it also made an exception if the mother's life is in danger. At the same time, Harris refused to say whether she would place a limit on abortions should Roe v. Wade be reinstated. Take a look.
The lack of a precise date in cutting it off. You know this. They say that allows Democrats to perform abortions up until, birth.
Which is ridiculous.
Which is statistically not accurate.
And it's ridiculous.
I understand
and it's a
that.
mischaracterization of the point. No, the point is...
But do you need to be more precise?
I am being precise. We need to put into law the protections of Roe versus Wade.
And in other news today, shifting to religion, where the United Methodist Church yesterday officially lifted its ban on gay clergy. At the UMC's first general conference in 5 years, delegates voted 692 to 51 to repeal a 40-year-old measure banning the ordination of, quote, self-avowed practicing homosexuals. They also removed penalties for celebrating same-sex marriages as well. Now, the vote was ultimately not unexpected, as the denomination has become increasingly accepting of LGBT practices, something we've covered quite a bit on our show for some time, and that's caused tension with more conservative churches in the denomination itself. Much of that opposition is coming from African churches. One UMC pastor in West Zimbabwe, for example, said, quote, "We see homosexuality as a sin, and this is a fundamental theological difference." A number of churches are now leaving the denomination or have already left to join the Global Methodist Church, which has become the conservative alternative to the UMC.
And let's end today on a note of hope. The National Day of Prayer is today. The organization named its theme for 2024 as Lift Up the Word, Light Up the World. That theme was echoed in a promotional video from NDP's president, Kathy Branzell.
Greetings, prayer partners. Does the world feel a little darker right now? Jesus told us that we ought always pray and not lose heart. And so join us for the National Day of Prayer, national observance, where we will lift up the word and light up the world.
The verse used for this year's theme is 2 Samuel 22, 29 through 31, which reads, "For you are my lamp, O Lord, and my God lightens my darkness. For by you I can run against a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all those who take refuge in him." The broadcast will be held tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time and feature a variety of guests. It can be viewed on the organization's website, nationaldayofprayer.org. That is nationaldayofprayer.org.
And it certainly comes at a time when our nation desperately needs that prayer because, just frankly, looking at all the stories we covered, like I said, we really need God to intervene in so many of these issues we're facing right now.
That's absolutely right. And we have to remember that our ultimate salvation is found only in God, and then the ultimate answer is found in Jesus.
Not in politics or any of these other things we're so tempted to put our faith in. Yeah.
Amen. Well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates until our next show, you probably know the drill, but you can find us on social media at FISM News or download the FISM app. All right, thanks so much. God bless, and we'll catch you tomorrow with more news.